when a 9-year-old girl went missing in St. Anne, Missouri, in 1993, an entire community feared for their children. Just 9 days later, a family's worst nightmare became a reality when the little girl was found murdered. Detectives and members of the Major Case Squad worked tirelessly to solve the homicide, but justice would not come for little Angie Houseman for 25 years. This is the case of a little girl lost, the Angie Houseman story. Police in Missouri saw the 20-year-old cold case after a woman told officers that her husband had murdered both victims and burned their bodies. The woman told the FBI that her late husband had killed Angela Mack Hawks and her 4-year-old son, Thomas Michael Ratu, and disposed of their bodies in a furnace attached to their farmhouse. She told authorities she had not come forward with the shocking information before because she feared for her life. The grisly murders are believed to have taken place at her farm in Missouri in December 2002. Today, in this video, we are going to look into the detailed events of 2 cold cases that show how it took decades to bring the perpetrator to justice. As police scrambled forces to locate the bodies, a gruesome discovery turned these cases into horrific homicides. Several days after being reported missing, the bodies were found in the wilderness. These are among the most high-profile criminal cases in the region for the last 30 years. But how did these victims die? Who were Angie Houseman and Angela Mack Cox? Who killed them? And where are the killers now? To answer these questions, let's take a detailed look into these cases and find out how the phrase stranger danger became prevalent among children. Had Earl Cox's car not broken down on November 8, 1993, 9-year-old Angie Houseman might still be alive. This is the typical child kidnapping case that you think about, the one you heard your parents warn you about when you were a kid. Angie Houseman was a cheerful and kind-hearted 9-year-old in love with life. She resided in St. and in St. Charles County, Missouri, with her parents. She was considered a gifted student and was loved both at school and at home. Angie was always ready to make people smile, which made accepting her gruesome death even more difficult. She was born on February 18, 1984. Her mother, Diana Houseman, married her stepfather, Ronald Bone, when Angie was just a toddler. Angie became a big sister to Ronald Bone Jr. Angie disappeared off the face of the earth on November 18, 1993, while returning home from school. On that day, she got off the school bus as she did each afternoon in her neighborhood. Normally, 2 parents in the community would watch as the kids walked home on that street in St. Anne. However, on this day, both parents were busy and no one was watching the children as they walked home. Angie had to walk 8 houses to get home. She didn't know that this distance would turn out to be an opportunity for someone who had eyes on her. She made it past the house and then seemed to vanish. Kids in the neighborhood did not recall seeing where Angie went or who she was with. She was there 1 minute and gone the next. When it took more than 30 minutes for Angie to return home after school, her mother and stepfather became concerned. Angie was outgoing and would often stop to chat with neighbors along her way home, but it had never taken this long before. They began searching the neighborhood, but there was no sign of Angie. The parents quickly reported their child missing, and an investigation began. Including Angie's parents, the police initially did not rule anyone out as a person of interest. They interrogated her stepfather, Ron, for a significant amount of time. He even took a polygraph test. The massive ground searches and interrogations of family members and neighbors failed to produce any leads. On November 21st, the FBI joined the search. Despite the missing person case not fitting the criteria, for the first time in history, the Major Case Squad was called in to assist in the investigation. While the massive search ensued, police received hundreds of tips from all over the St. Louis area. An attempted abduction nearby was reported just a week before Angie's disappearance. But unlike Angie, that girl was able to escape. Police were given a description of a suspicious male in the area who had been driving a blue car. A police sketch was produced, but these clues didn't lead to a suspect or to Angie. Psychics began producing their own theories, and one claimed to dream about police finding Angie's body in the August A. Bush wildlife area. Strangely, this dream or prophecy would turn out to be real just 9 days after she disappeared. On November 27, 1993, a deer hunter found Angie Houseman's remains in the August A. Bush Wildlife Area, almost exactly where the psychic said she would be found. Upon reaching the spot, police found a heartbreaking and horrible sight. Angie was left there entirely without clothes and tied to a tree. According to medical experts, the young girl was found just hours after passing away. Investigators believed Angie was still alive when her murderer left her there. However, the cold affected her terribly, and small bits of ice formed all over her body, making Angie suffer a terrible death. This missing person case had now turned into a homicide case. In the days she was missing, she had been severely dehydrated. Her hair had been cut and colored. She had been held for some time before her body was put in the woods. Her autopsy determined that Angie likely died just hours before her body was found, with the official cause of death being hypothermia. She froze to death after being left naked and tied to a tree following a week of pure hell. Some forensic clues were retrieved from the examination, including a fingerprint on the duct tape that covered her mouth. Early clues in the investigation included Angie's teacher giving an alarming statement. She said Angie told her that her uncle was taking her for a visit to the countryside, but there was no uncle. None of Angie's friends or classmates knew who this uncle was. Then, for days after Angie's body was found, another girl disappeared from Hazelwood, Missouri. Hazelwood is about 10 miles from St. Anne, and police feared there was a serial predator in the area. These fears intensified when the girl was also found murdered. However, this case was solved in early 1994 and was not connected to Angie's case after all. The FBI profiled Angie's killer and described him as a white male aged 20 to 45, a loner who had recently lost his job and didn't get along well with women. This profile was made public, and thousands of leads came in. In total, 200 men were considered suspects and ruled out as the perpetrator in Angie's case. One of those men was a man from Florida named John Wayne Parsons. John Wayne admitted to molesting 2 9-year-old girls in Florida and another young girl in Potosi, Missouri. When he was arrested in Florida on sex offenses against minors, several newspaper clippings were found on the Angie Houseman case. However, forensics ruled out John Wayne in this case. Another man gave a deathbed confession to the crime, but he was in prison at the time of the murder and was also ruled out. In February 2001, a man named Corey Lynn Fox came forward and claimed to have murdered Angie. He even had some details of the crime that matched. For example, he was able to describe Angie's Barbie underwear in great detail. Fox also confessed to dozens of other murders, including claiming to have murdered Missouri Governor Mel Carnahan. Only, Mel Carnahan died in a plane crash, and police were able to rule out Corey Fox in most of the crimes he confessed to, including Angie Houseman's murder. Police say press coverage of the story was too intense when Angie was murdered, so the details of her underwear were likely read in the newspaper. The years continued to pass, and Angie's case remained unsolved. Anyone living in the St. Louis area remembers the news coverage throughout the years, reminding the community that Angie's murder remained unsolved. Angie went on to have 2 more siblings who would never get to know their big sister. In 2016, Angie's mother tragically passed away from cancer. She passed away before police were able to bring her daughter's murderer to justice. Unfortunately, the case sat unsolved for decades, and although police kept getting several tips that were diligently followed, they all turned out to be dead ends. However, the detectives never gave up hope. In 2018, police in St. Charles County decided to reevaluate Angie's case. In 2019, DNA testing was performed on the evidence from the crime. All these years later, DNA testing on Angie's underwear was analyzed using advanced technology and produced a profile of a male suspect. When the DNA matched a man in federal custody, the detectives were shocked. After 25 years, police knew who killed Angie Houseman. On March 1, 2019, police identified Earl Cox as Angie's killer. Earl Cox was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. In 1975, he graduated from Jennings High School. After high school, he enrolled in the United States Air Force. In the Air Force, Cox worked as a computer operator and was stationed in Frankfurt, Germany. In 1982, Earl Cox was court-martialed for sexually abusing 4 girls under the age of 11 while stationed in Germany. He was dishonorably discharged and sentenced to 8 years at Fort Leavenworth Prison in Kansas. He was paroled in 1985 and returned to the St. Louis area. In 1989, Earl Cox was arrested in Overland after taking 2 11-year-old girls to the movies and the park, which, coincidentally, is right behind Angie's school. Despite the sexual assault allegations, those charges were eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence in 1991. However, his arrest was enough to revoke his parole, and he was locked back up. He was released again in 1992. Upon release, he again returned to the St. Louis area. On November 18, 1993, Earl was driving to his sister's house, which happened to be near Angie's bus stop. His car was acting up, so he stopped to look under the hood. He said he saw the school bus and watched as Angie Houseman exited the bus. When Angie walked past, he asked the little girl if she was hungry. Angie said she was cold and hungry and agreed to get in Earl's truck. He took her to Burger King and bought her food. He then drove around with the girl and eventually took her back to his home. He later claimed that after kidnapping Angie, he kept her hidden in his mobile home, even without the knowledge of his then live-in girlfriend. The girl also confirmed that she was not allowed to enter one of the rooms in their house. Angie's last few days on Earth were terrifying, as she was repeatedly assaulted and tortured before her killer decided to leave her out in the cold to die. Down the sidewalk, towards her home, Cox engaged her in conversation and then coaxed her into the vehicle. Ultimately, based on the DNA evidence, police were able to arrest Earl Cox and charge him with murder. Once produced in court, Earl Cox decided to enter a plea agreement wherein the prosecution would take the death penalty off the table in exchange for a guilty plea. He subsequently pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and sexual abuse. Based on his plea, in August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for murder, with an additional 7 years for sexual abuse. A few months later, in March 2021, he further pleaded guilty through an Alford plea to molesting a child just 4 years before Angie's disappearance. As a result, he was convicted on 4 counts of sodomy against the 14-year-old victim, which got him a total of 40 years added to his sentence. As of today, Earl Webster Cox remains incarcerated at the Eastern Reception, Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri. This is the case of Angela Mack Cox and her 4-year-old son, Thomas Michael Ratu, who disappeared and were later found to have been murdered in February 2002. The case now appears to have finally been solved, but the killer can't go to jail. In this story, a woman confessed to authorities that an Arkansas mother and son, missing for almost 20 years, were murdered by her husband. On September 1, 2002, Tommy Ratu, the father of Thomas Michael Ratu, filed a missing persons report with then Salina Police Chief Albert Rourke. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children contacted FCSO investigator Dale Weaver about a message received regarding the missing child and his mother, Angela Mack Cox. Weaver interviewed Angela's friends and family during the investigation and learned that Angela married James Cox on April 10, 2002. She had remarried when her life began to spiral downward. Previously, she had been wed to Tommy Ratu, who had filed the missing persons report. Police found out that on May 29, 2002, Angela and James were involved in an accident that resulted in multiple deaths. The newlyweds were briefly hospitalized as a result of the accident. While the couple was recuperating, James' brother, Jeremy Cox, picked up Angela and Mikey. Their trip took an immediate turn for the worse when Jeremy was arrested for being in possession of a stolen vehicle. That left Angela and Mikey stranded in Elton, Missouri. Roughly 2 weeks later, James received a phone call from Angela. Weirdly, she was in California at the time. She was happy and apparently sounded like herself. She wanted to come home, but James never saw or spoke to his wife ever again. Authorities say that while staying in Missouri for a while, Angela and Mikey came into contact with brothers Dale and Clarence Cruson. Jeremy was looking for cattle work. He knew Dale but did not know Clarence very well. Clarence and Barbara Cruson got to know Angela and Mikey pretty well during this time. However, the 3 adults came to an adoption agreement. The Crusons would raise Mikey as their own, and Angela would be on her own. The circumstances of what led to that initial decision have yet to be released. though Jeremy Cox told investigators that he later heard Angela had given her son, Mikey, to the Cruzens. But while in California, Angela changed her mind. She wanted her son back and was ready to be back with her new husband, but it never happened. Both mother and son were quickly murdered after that. The mother and child were murdered in late 2002 or early 2003 before being placed in a furnace and burned away into nothing. Even the farmhouse furnace removed their bodies from the earth along with all evidence of the crime, which was no longer available. During the investigation, Detective Weaver learned that Mikey had been seen several times by different people with Clarence and Barbara Cruzan, who lived in the Elton area, although this was later claimed to be a rumor. Angela's mother, Lorna Poole, stated that the last time her daughter had contacted her was on December 11, 2002. Angela was in Chowchilla, California, and was going to leave Chowchilla to pick up Mikey from Clarence in Elton. A week later, Poole called her daughter, but from the other side of the call, she was told that Angela had left. Poole then called Clarence. He told Poole that Jeremy Cox had picked up Angela and Mikey, and that he and his wife would be adopting Mikey with Angela's permission. But Poole later found out that Jeremy could not have picked up Angela because he was in jail at the time. Between 2004 and February 2005, Clarence and Barbara moved back to Virginia. Missouri State Police indicted Clarence for firearms violations, and he was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. He served 8 years and was paroled in Texas. He was later shot dead on February 12, 2005, in Laredo, Texas, by William Henry Johnson. Weaver contacted Barbara Cruzan. She told Weaver that she met Angela in February while Angela was working for Clarence on their farm. Later, Angela brought Mikey to their house, and they kept him for a while, making adoption arrangements. Barbara stated that the documents were signed by all three parties. Angela then headed to Chowchilla, California, and worked at a Burger King. Angela changed her mind about the adoption. Both Barbara and Clarence were not pleased and told her to come back and pick up the child. The Cruzans sent money for Angela to return twice. Upon receiving the funds, Angela returned to Springfield, Missouri. Barbara told Weaver she met Angela at the Springfield bus stop. The following day, they returned to the farm, met Clarence and Mikey there, and stayed for the evening. The next morning, Barbara said Angela and Mikey were gone. Clarence told Barbara that someone had come and picked them up, but she didn't hear any vehicle come or go from the residence that night or the next morning. Weaver asked the Virginia FBI to polygraph Barbara Cruzan in her hometown, and the FBI agreed. The FBI out of the Norfolk office conducted a pre-polygraph interview with Barbara and an exam, which she failed regarding knowledge of what happened to Angela and Mikey. In a post-polygraph interview, Barbara told the agents that Clarence had confessed to her that he had done away with Angela Mack Cox and Thomas Michael Ratu by killing them and destroying their bodies in a furnace attached to their farmhouse. She said when they moved from the farmhouse to the house in Elton, Clarence told her they had to move the furnace because it had been used to destroy the bodies of Angela and Mikey. Weaver spoke to Barbara, who gave him the same information, that Clarence had admitted to killing them and destroying their bodies. She said they moved from the farmhouse and told her the furnace had to go because of what it had been used for. The Oregon County, Missouri, Sheriff King was contacted and provided assistance in the case, along with the Oregon County State's Attorney, the Arkansas State Police, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. For Angela, Tiffany Thomas founded a Facebook page called Justice for Angie. Tiffany made it her mission to find her missing school friend and did not let Angie be forgotten. Tiffany appreciated the information on the case. She said that it was good to have some answers that she had been waiting for, but these were not the answers she had hoped for. The Sheriff's Department now says it considers the case solved. We were able to close this case as of April 7, 2021, Sheriff Rourke said. These cases were able to be closed by the authorities in some unusual ways. Though it took a long time for the detectives to track down the person responsible, it would be counted as justice served. What do you think about these two cold cases, which were high profile and especially victimized children? What could be the reason for such increasing crime and abuse directed toward children, and, to be precise, mostly female children? The horrible case of Nibaldo Villegas. Nibaldo Villegas worked as a computers teacher in the Valparaiso region of Chile. Everyone who knew him said he was a kind man who loved to help. He had many friends, both within and outside his work environment, and enjoyed socializing, often meeting up with relatives and friends. However, he never neglected his job. In February 2009, when Nibaldo was 41, he met Johanna Hernandez, a 23-year-old woman studying at the same university where he taught. Johanna was going through a tough time, having just ended a relationship with her boyfriend since she was 15, with whom she had 2 children. Nibaldo was like a beacon of light for her. In December of that year, they started a relationship and both their lives improved. Nibaldo and his family welcomed Johanna's children as if they were their own. After getting married, Nibaldo built a house with his own hands for them to live together and be happy. Their greatest joy came when Johanna gave birth to a daughter, their child together. For 8 years, the relationship faced no major problems, and Nibaldo's professional life continued to prosper. Motivated by him, Johanna continued her nursing technician studies. When they did argue, Nibaldo preferred to go running, and upon returning, after both had time to reflect, they would talk in their bedroom and resolve their differences. But good things don't last forever. In 2018, their arguments became constant. Johanna started reacting differently to problems, becoming physically and emotionally violent. Nibaldo tried his usual approach of walking away and returning when she was ready to talk. But Johanna had changed. Her mood would shift rapidly, leaving Nibaldo with no time to leave. Things escalated to the point where Johanna, during an argument, started throwing things around and declared the relationship over. Nibaldo agreed to end the relationship but was concerned about her reactions. He went to the police station and filed a domestic violence report, fearing for his daughter's safety. Although the police dismissed the complaint, Johanna took it seriously and a big dispute ensued over the house in custody of their daughter. Due to Johanna's violent outbursts, Nibaldo sought full custody. The family completely broke down, stopped living together, and Nibaldo filed for divorce, only seeing each other through lawyers. Eventually, the courts ruled for shared custody, which Johanna did not accept well. She began harassing Nibaldo, demanding the house he had painstakingly built. On one occasion, she showed up at the university parking lot and threw stones at his car. Nibaldo maintained his composure, not wanting to worsen the situation or make his daughter uncomfortable, and eagerly awaited the finalization of their divorce for a change. August 1038 was an important date for Nibaldo, his 50th birthday. He spent most of the day with his daughter, but went to his parents' house in the evening. He left his daughter with them as he was dining with friends and promised to return soon to put her to bed. The grandparents were happy to take care of her and spent quality time with her for several hours. However, when bedtime came, Nibaldo didn't show up. They tried calling his cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Nibaldo, who was always attentive when his daughter wasn't with him. They decided to go to their son's house. On arrival, they noticed something suspicious. Nibaldo's car was parked in front. They entered the house and saw the house keys on a table, along with the jacket their son had been wearing when he left his daughter before dinner. However, what struck them most was a shattered glass on the floor. They hurried upstairs to Nibaldo's bedroom, fearing what they suspected. Their son was nowhere to be found, and their alarm grew. That same night, Nibaldo's parents went to the police station to file a missing person report. The search operation began immediately, involving friends, university acquaintances, and even neighbors, but no one knew where Nibaldo was. When Johanna was interrogated, she stated they hadn't seen each other for a long time due to their separation and appeared extremely distressed about his disappearance. Days later, Johanna showed up at Nibaldo's house, which his brother was staying at, carrying a large bag. She declared she would stay as long as she wanted, claiming it was her house too since they were still legally married. This seemed odd to the brother, knowing the couple had ended on very bad terms. To the Villegas family's surprise, Johanna became increasingly involved in the search for Nibaldo, posting on Facebook and giving interviews where she tearfully pleaded for her estranged partner's return. For 5 days, the country was gripped by the search for the missing teacher until a boat brought an answer. On August 15th of that year, workers at the pier near Valparaiso, while performing their duties, spotted something alarming in the water. A human torso without limbs was floating in the calm sea. They immediately alerted the police. Once the authorities and forensic experts arrived, they determined it was a man between 30 and 50 years old. While they couldn't establish the identity yet, everyone thought the same. It had to be the missing professor, whose face had been all over the television for the past 5 days. On August 20th, the prosecution and homicide brigade of the investigative police confirmed that the torso belonged to none other than Nibaldo. The discovery made a strong statement. Nibaldo was a peaceful man, got along with everyone, and had never been involved in anything illegal. The perpetrator had to be someone from his close circle. As detectives began their investigation, Johanna was the of Nibaldo's relatives to give a television interview and crying inconsolably, urging the capture of the culprit. Unbeknownst to her, she was exposing herself. On the day the body was found, 2 men went to the police station, wanting to speak to detectives about what they had seen on the day Nibaldo disappeared. On the early morning of August 11th, the 2 individuals headed to the beach, intending to go on a fishing trip. Although unfamiliar with the area, they were excited about the expedition. However, their enthusiasm waned when they got lost at sea in the dark. Just as they were losing hope, they saw distant orange flames. They approached the shore with their boat and noticed a bonfire. A man was trying to keep the flames alive, using branches, cloths, and other objects they couldn't identify. The fishermen approached to ask for directions, thinking he might be lost like them. They tried to engage in casual conversation, but the man barely responded, only telling them it wasn't a good area for fishing before turning his attention back to the fire. The fishermen found the situation odd, especially when they noticed a blue car parked a few meters from the bonfire with a woman inside smoking frantically. The situation seemed highly suspicious, but with nowhere else to go, the fishermen decided to stay overnight for shelter from the cold. At dawn, the woman got out of the car and approached the man by the fire. They appeared unaware of the fisherman's presence, shared a kiss, and gave one last look at the bonfire before driving away without a word. Before leaving, the fisherman took a closer look at the fire and noticed a sharp knife among the flames. Although it seemed strange, they preferred not to investigate further. They didn't think about that night again until days later when a human torso was stung floating near where they had been, realizing they had accidentally witnessed a terrible crime. After hearing the fisherman's story, the police went to the beach. It was a secluded area, so the remains of the bonfire were still there. They discovered that the mysterious man wasn't just burning branches and cloths, but also human remains. Forensic experts confirmed these were the remaining limbs of Nibaldo. But the fishermen provided another crucial piece of information. They described the woman smoking in the blue car as dark-haired with long straight hair of a darker complexion and around 30 years old, the same woman seen crying on television. From that moment, the police began investigating Johanna as the primary suspect in Nibaldo's murder. The only question was the identity of the man with her. Days later, the police discovered that Nibaldo's credit card had been used to withdraw 35,000 pesos from an ATM at a gas station on the morning of August 11th. Security cameras showed a man in black making the transaction. The victim's family recognized him as Johanna's current partner, Francisco Silva. Additionally, shortly after the body's identification, Johanna went to a real estate agency to inquire about the property registered to Nibaldo, which they had fought over countless times and where she had moved after his disappearance. There was no doubt that both Johanna and Silva were guilty of the crime. Both suspects gave their testimony at the oral criminal court. They admitted to being part of the crime but blamed each other for its execution. Johanna was to give her version. She said her relationship with Silva was extremely complicated. Since they started dating, he had been manipulative, controlling what she wore, who she associated with, and even encouraged her to sign a prenuptial agreement. Silva's violence was not only reflected in his relationship with Johanna, but also in his strong feelings towards Nibaldo, seemingly driven by jealousy. After Nibaldo tried to gain full custody of the daughter he shared with Johanna, she came home crying. This intensified Silva's hatred, who said he would make Nibaldo disappear someday. The week before, on August 10/38, Silva arrived at Johanna's house with a jar containing a blue powder, instructing her not to ask questions and indicating he would have orders for her during the week. Accustomed to obeying Silva, Johanna agreed. On the Friday of Nibaldo's birthday, Francisco Silva contacted Johanna, instructing her to meet him to celebrate and detailed the steps to follow. That night, Johanna arrived at the house of Nibaldo. He greeted her, hoping for reconciliation. Johanna brought sushi and a drink for dinner, but she omitted a crucial detail. The drink was laced with clonazepam. 10 minutes after sitting down to eat, Nibaldo began to doze off. Once he was completely unconscious, Johanna took him to his bed, snapped 2 photos, and sent them to Silva, completing her part of the plan. Silva then entered the house, changed into black clothing, and headed to the room where Nibaldo was carrying a knife. Minutes later, he came downstairs and informed Johanna that he had mutilated Nibaldo. He gave her gloves to clean the blood in the room and a trash bag for the limbs. While disposing of the body, Silva ominously warned Johanna that no matter what happened, she must not accuse him or he would ensure she was seen as the true perpetrator. They then drove to the beach where they burned the limbs and clothing in a bonfire and tossed the torso into the sea. However, Silva's version was somewhat different. He not only denied Johanna's accusations but also portrayed her as a violent person, prone to destructive outbursts when angry. According to him, Johanna used her tantrums and intimacy to manipulate him. He mentioned the prenuptial contract as a joke inside gag after watching the movie 50 Shades, which she exploited to her advantage. The worst crisis came when Nibaldo wanted full custody of their daughter. Johanna swore she'd never forgive him and was ready to murder him. Seeing how upset Johanna was, Silva felt it was his duty as a man to do something about it and decided to do whatever she asked. Days later, Johanna requested he buy 30 clonazepam pills and grind them, which he did. The main difference in Silva's story was that on Friday, August 10th, they were to follow their usual routine of having a barbecue, drinking, and sleeping in his car at the beach. However, when he picked Johanna up from her mother's house, he learned she had a different plan. She said they needed to stop by Nibaldo's to discuss their daughter. Once there, Johanna asked Silva to wait at a nearby place and wait for her instructions. He agreed. At 1 a.m., Silva woke to 3 WhatsApp messages from Johanna, 2 photos of an unconscious Nibaldo in bed, and a message asking him to come get her. Arriving at the house, Johanna was frantic, explaining she had drugged Nibaldo with clonazepam before attacking him with a knife. The problem was that while she was stabbing him, Nibaldo woke up and his pleas could be heard from the bedroom. Johanna instructed Silva to finish the murder, handing him a sharp knife. Silva went upstairs and fatally stabbed Nibaldo in the thoracic area. Immediately after, Johanna asked Silva to help her dismember the body to make it easier to hide. The rest of the story, involving the movement and concealment of different body parts, was exactly the same in both their accounts, seemingly the only aspect they both wanted to take responsibility for. The methods of the murder and the locations where the body parts were found matched in both stories. What differed was the principal perpetrator, as each one aimed to receive a lesser sentence. They also agreed in their statement that the murder was not premeditated. However, the prosecutors argued that the crime seemed meticulously planned, given how it was executed. Technology experts located both of their cell phones at Nibaldo's house at the time of his death, and both had photos of the unconscious man in bed, implicating Johanna and Silva equally in the eyes of justice. The prosecutor stated that Johanna was the material author of the crime. Francisco Silva was convicted as the material author of qualified homicide. Both had the aggravating factor of treachery, which occurs when the perpetrator uses means or ways to eliminate all the victim's possibilities of defense. In Nibaldo's case, the means was the substance that rendered him unconscious. On May 1639, the criminal court informed the sentence for both defendants. Receiving the maximum possible penalty, Johanna was sentenced to life imprisonment, meaning she must serve 40 years before being eligible for penitentiary benefits. Silva was sentenced to simple life imprisonment, meaning he could opt for penitentiary benefits after 20 years. Johanna's defense requested a reclassification of the sentence, arguing she had collaborated with the investigation. They also sought to annul the aggravating factor of treachery, claiming there was no proof of clonazepam administration. Silva's lawyer also tried to reduce the sentence by claiming active participation in the investigation. Fortunately for the victim's family, both requests were denied. About 100 people gathered outside the court, celebrating with intense banners. But while citizens unrelated to the crime celebrated, the families involved in the case were left shattered. The village's family's lawyer stated that while they were satisfied with the sentence, Nibaldo's siblings would seek an update in the law, advocating for harsher penalties in dismemberment cases. Without the complete body of the victim, they couldn't give a dignified burial. Johanna's father also spoke about the crime, saying she had always been manipulative and violent, but worsened after meeting Francisco Silva. He agreed with her sentence and said he would never forgive her. In other interviews, he recalled Nibaldo's good character and expressed that he would always consider him part of the family, often visiting his grave with flowers. After the trial, Johanna and Silva were transferred to a penitentiary complex, where their troubles did not end. In prison, Johanna gained a high status for having ended her husband's life, instilling fear in most of the other inmates. Silva, on the other hand, was completely isolated, only going out to the yard when other inmates were not there. His situation only worsened over time. He went on a hunger strike for several days and wrote a letter to the National Human Rights Institute and the Court of Appeals, requesting a reduction in his sentence. When his plans did not work, Silva tried to contact Johanna, telling her he had spoken with a lawyer and was trying to reopen the case. His plan was for Johanna to claim she was the murderer so he would be seen as an accomplice. According to him, this would frame the crime as a momentary act of violence and might reduce their sentences for lack of premeditation. Johanna refused outright, and Enraged Francisco threatened her, claiming he had contacts who could harm her at any time. Eventually, Johanna filed a complaint for murder threats with the public ministry, which could play in her favor as it portrayed Silva as manipulative and conspiratorial, just as she had described him in her version of the events. As a result, the only measures taken against Silva were the confiscation of his cell phone and his transfer to a high-security cell. He was also barred from receiving family visits. While the murderers continue their lives in prison, Nibaldo's family is still fighting for him to rest in peace. They submitted a request to amend the penal code. The proposal named Nibaldo's Law aimed to add a clause to more rigorously penalize dismemberment or damage to a corpse, increasing the sentence for perpetrators by 3 to 5 years. If enacted, this law would not be retroactive and would not change the sentences for Nibaldo's murderers, but it would apply to future cases. The Villegas family might never be able to give Nibaldo a dignified burial, but they could prevent other families from suffering the same pain. In March 2022, the law was unanimously approved by the Senate and is currently being debated in the Chamber of Deputies. If it passes, it will only need the executive's approval to be officially promulgated. The Villegas siblings continue to carry this fight on their shoulders. Nothing will bring Nibaldo back, but they are doing everything possible to make the world a fairer place. On June 5, 1986, in Eugene, Oregon, the police and the fire department were called to an apartment as they believed that a person had died. An apartment employee stated that he had not seen 62-year-old Glattis May Hensley for several days and was concerned about her. Unfortunately, the day the police arrived, he had found Glattis murdered in her apartment. The investigation started, but there was no sign of forced entry into the apartment, nor were there any suspects. The police believed that Glattis was killed in the early hours of June 4th. This case was still ongoing when, on June 19, 1986, the body of a 33-year-old woman, Janice Dickinson, was found on the hillside behind a car dealership on Coburg Road. She was found naked and was lying upside down on her face. The police quickly linked Janice's murder to Glattis's, as they had both been found in the same area and were also murdered in the same way. There were no further clues, unfortunately, and the case went cold until 2 years later, in 1988, when 73-year-old Geraldine Tuohy was on the phone with her sister. When her call suddenly dropped, her sister believed that it was a small power cut or that somebody else had called her, so she did not worry that much. The next day, when she dropped by her house, she found a horrible scene. Geraldine was lying naked on the floor and was brutally murdered. The investigators knew that this case was also linked to Janice's and Glattis's murders, as it was done in a similar manner. The murderer had broken in through the front door and had cut the phone lines so that nobody would reach Geraldine. Unfortunately, due to no evidence, this case also grew cold. Many years later, the police sought the help of the Genetic Genealogy Department to identify the murderer in this case. This time, it was successful and a suspect was found. It was a man named John Charles Balsinger. He was born on September 17, 1957, but unfortunately, the case once again hit a dead end, as he had ended his life on March 23, 1988, in Springfield, Oregon. When John's history was looked into, it was revealed that he had been taken into custody for murder in 1980 in the state of Utah and was sentenced to only 5 years of imprisonment. After serving only a short amount of time, he got out and was subsequently linked to the murders of those 3 women, Janice, Glattis, and Geraldine. The case was finally solved, but before the murderer could be caught, he was already dead. Minnesota, a seemingly perfect town for anyone to live in, but every place has its dark secrets. In August 2003, something peculiar happened. Some skeletal remains were discovered on Highway 5 in Bradford Township. The way the skeletal remains were found was eerie, as the landowner was excavating that area and was shocked to find these remains. He alerted the authorities, who later sent them to forensics. They soon analyzed the details of the skeleton to find out more about who it belonged to. The forensic team revealed that it was the body of a white male who was no more than 28 years old. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension in Minnesota also revealed that the body had been buried there for decades, and nobody had discovered it until now. The forensic team gathered all the evidence and started creating the man's DNA profile. They also analyzed his teeth to try and match them with a database of records to identify him. But no record was ever found. The investigators named the man the Asante County John Doe and made several attempts to reconstruct his face. Everybody wanted to know who this mysterious John Doe was and who killed the man and buried him there years ago. Several years passed, and many people came forward to give their DNA samples to help with the investigation. John's mystery, however, still seemed to be at a dead end. In 2019, the forensic department reopened the case with advanced technology at their disposal. It was when Chief Deputy Lisa Lovering initiated the process of advanced DNA technology that the case of John was reopened, and his DNA was submitted to the lab. Unfortunately, the DNA was too old to be analyzed. Later that year, Lisa heard of a Texas-based laboratory that used gray genome sequencing to build the profiles of skeletal remains. The laboratory was named Othram, and it was with their help that the forensics team was able to develop a new viable DNA profile for John Doe. A new DNA profile was made, and this time was sent to a genetic genealogy consultant, Barbara Ray, for further investigation. In less than 24 hours, Barbara Ray, along with Deputy Chief Lisa Lovering, found a match to a distant relative. In no time, she obtained the information on 2 of John's siblings and their phone numbers. Now the investigation officially started, and the siblings were contacted. It was revealed that their brother, Donald Rindle of Ramsey County, Minnesota, had been missing since 1970. The siblings told the investigators that the FBI had been looking for Donald but had not had any luck. Later, in 2022, the DNA of all the siblings was matched, and it was finally revealed that the Asante County John Doe was, in fact, the very same Donald who had been missing for 51 years. It was believed that someone had taken his life and he had been buried at that site when he was 22. Investigators also believe that people who might be involved in his murder or know the whole story might still be alive to this day, but nothing is confirmed. This was a very emotional moment for the family, as they were able to find closure about Donald's disappearance after 51 long years. In 1994, a 39-year-old woman named Cheryl Houss lived in Desert Hot Springs, California. She had recently gotten divorced from her husband Jeff Houss, who lived in Cathedral City, California. After their divorce, Cheryl moved to the Hot Springs to start a new life. They both had 3 children, and they shared custody of the 3. One of them was 14, the other 13, and the little one was only 8 years old. After 2 months of separation from her husband, Cheryl was excited to start fresh in her new apartment. But the unimaginable was about to happen. On April 23, 1994, Cheryl called her parents to tell them that someone had been taking photos of her and she had been receiving anonymous phone calls from someone. She sounded terrified, and so her parents decided to check on her. On April 23rd, they left their house to go to Hot Springs, California. When they reached Cheryl's apartment, things did not feel normal. The porch light was on, her dog was out, and her car was parked on the street instead of the driveway. The parents went inside and found a horrendous scene. Cheryl's body was lying partially naked on the floor. She had been stabbed multiple times. There was also a bite mark on her neck by her potential murderer. The parents called 911, and the investigations immediately started. The police took saliva samples from the bite on Cheryl's neck and created a DNA profile of the murderer. They tried to match it with several other DNA profiles in their database, but found no match. Years had passed, and Cheryl's parents tried their best to keep the case alive. They even offered a reward of $50,000 for anyone who might identify the murderer. In 2022, with the help of the latest genetic technology, the DNA was identified, and to everyone's surprise, a match was found. The DNA belonged to a male who lived 12 miles away from Cheryl's home and was now 48 years old. Cher and Eugene Gatton were the persons of interest. He was just 20 years old when he murdered Cheryl. On February 14th, they received a saliva sample from Sharon, and on the 18th, it was confirmed that he was the murderer. On March 4th, 2022, he was arrested, and it was found out that he had been arrested for trespassing, intoxication, and had gotten many DUIs in 1994, but was still roaming around free until his recent arrest. It was still unclear why he murdered Cheryl or what the main motive behind his barbaric act was. But after several years of being in the dark, Cheryl's family finally got justice. The horrible case of Ella Bennett. Ella Bennett was born on April 12, 2002 in Georgia, USA, into a family beset by conflicts. To understand the environment she was born into and lived in during her short life, we must understand her mother, Charity Lee. Her life was fraught with challenges from a young age, marked by tragedy and later struggles with substance abuse and problematic relationships. Charity was born on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, to kill a Clark Bennett and James Robert Bennett Jr. A defining moment in her childhood occurred when she was just 6 years old. Her father, a 37-year-old trucking company owner, was fatally shot in a violent attack inside their home in an exclusive residential area of Atlanta. He was found with multiple gunshot wounds to his head, chest, and back. The police reported that he was alone at the time of the crime and that there were no signs of struggle at the scene. Initially, authorities suspected organized crime. However, the aftermath of James's funeral brought a shocking development. Charity's mother, Kayla, then 29, became the prime suspect in his murder. The charges were laid just 3 days after the couple, previously divorced, had remarried in Las Vegas. Evidence against Kayla included details like the unlocked doors of their home and her status as the primary heir to the trucking business. Additionally, the patrol officer who transported Kayla post-arrest noted that she occasionally exhibited satisfaction in her demeanor. During the trial, evidence was presented suggesting Kayla had been in contact with a truck driver and might have been involved in the crime. Despite this, the jury found her not guilty due to insufficient evidence, leading to her acquittal. The presiding judge described it as the most peculiar case of his career, given the variety of plausible angles and hypotheses. The controversy surrounding her father's death and her mother's high-profile trial deeply impacted Charity. During her mother's imprisonment, she was cared for by her maternal grandparents. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, Charity sought love and approval from her mother. In a desperate bid for attention, she intentionally turned to drugs, frustrated by her mother's apparent disinterest. At 17, Charity battled depression and heroin addiction, straining her relationship with her mother to the point of being kicked out of the house. With just $100 given by her mother, Charity faced a stark choice between rehabilitation and potential overdose. This money, however, became her lifeline as she chose to enter a rehabilitation center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She achieved sobriety for about a year, finding a place to live and enrolling in college. Nevertheless, her journey to sobriety was fraught with internal battles against her darkest demons. Nevertheless, during these difficult moments, she attempted to end her life on several occasions. At the age of 18, Charity became pregnant with her child and, at 3 months pregnant, decided she must definitively leave behind that dark stage in her life to become the best mother for her unborn child. That baby, whom she named Paris, became the motivation she needed to recover. She often said that her son had saved her life. When Paris Lee Bennett was born on October 10, 1993, in Adeline, Texas, Charity was alone because the father of the child had left her as soon as he learned of the pregnancy. Later, when Paris was 17 old, his father returned to their lives. Charity recounted that it was clear the father was not well, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. Paris was a very artistic and creative boy who enjoyed drawing, beginning at the age of 3. He was introverted, not very sociable, and reluctant to show affection to people he knew. The boy, who dreamed of becoming a paleontologist, was focused on his academic life. He studied a lot, had an IQ of 142, and never had problems at school. His performance was much higher than his peers, and his teachers considered him a unique child with potential and a promising future. After having her baby, Charity married twice, but neither union was successful. One marriage was with a man named Brendan, but the circumstances of their breakup were not disclosed. In her desire to form a family, Charity started a relationship with a man named Jonathan, and at the age of 28, she became pregnant with her child, a daughter. The news filled the family with joy, but initially, Paris did not seem happy about his mother's pregnancy, which worried Charity. However, once his sister was born, things changed. Paris fell in love with his sister, showing affection, protectiveness, and attentiveness towards her. Paris did not have many friends, and his little sister was his playmate. She was a loving, kind, intelligent, and very determined girl. From a young age, she demonstrated a compassionate nature, even expressing a desire for her mother to adopt all the hurt children in the world. Her loved ones described her as a little girl with a strong personality, always speaking her mind. Over the years, the happy home that Charity dreamed of turned into a nightmare. Her partner had serious alcoholism problems and was a violent man. According to Charity, the relationship ended when her husband was stopped by a police officer, and when asked to exit his vehicle, he refused. The officer reached into the car and the driver sped off, dragging the officer along. The officer then shot and injured him in the leg. When Charity learned about the incident, she decided she could not allow her children to live in such circumstances and chose to separate. The young girl enjoyed her relationship with her brother, finding fun and inspiration in playing with him, seeing him as a role model, and wanting to follow in his footsteps. Paris also appeared to enjoy his time with his younger sister. Childhood videos and photographs show them dancing, playing, and posing together, always smiling. In February 2005, Charity and her children moved to Dallas, Texas to be closer to Kyla, Charity's mother, who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Charity was a loving mother, but the stress and anxiety from her partner's separation and disputes with her mother led her to relapse into drug use. During the 6 months that Charity was under the influence, Paris took on the role of the protective older brother, a situation that significantly changed his life. He no longer saw his mother as a loving figure but as an unpleasant woman full of flaws and mistakes. Soon after, the three of them moved to Kyla's ranch in Seymour, Texas, where their lives became even more chaotic. It was during this time that a more emotionally unstable and violent side of Paris began to emerge. He had fits of rage, banging his head against the wall or throwing things on the floor to seek attention. However, Charity seemingly failed to interpret these signs. On one occasion, while living at Kyla's ranch, Paris broke a toy that his sister and a friend were playing with. Seeing this, Charity scolded and punished him. Minutes later, when his mother was away, Paris took a kitchen knife and ran out with it in his hand. Alarmed by the screams of one of the ranch workers, Charity and Kylo rushed to the scene and managed to disarm him after some struggle. Worried about her son and his violent outbursts, Charity took Paris to a psychiatric center. However, feeling that he was not given adequate attention, she decided to return home with her son. According to some accounts, there were other similar episodes later on. On one such occasion, Paris threatened his aunt and sister, leading Charity to take him again to a health center where he underwent various tests. The specialist told Charity that it was concerning for a child so young to have thoughts about harming others, recommending that she seek treatment for him. However, Charity did not take the psychiatrist's suggestions well, finding the evaluation erroneous and offensive, and disregarded the advice. Nonetheless, doubts about how to handle her son's situation lingered in her mind, and shortly after, the family moved to Abilene. Over time, Paris developed resentment towards his mother, leading to constant arguments between them. For Charity, although the changes in her son confused her, she didn't believe they were as serious as the psychologist had suggested. Unfortunately, she was mistaken. Then came February 4th, 2007. That day, 13-year-old Paris was visibly upset with his mother from the morning. But as he was a teenager and fights between mother and son had become a daily occurrence, she didn't give it much thought. At that time, Charity was working at a well-known restaurant near Abilene and had hired a babysitter that day to help while she was at work. She thought she had faced worse things with Paris and that, as in the past, everything would be resolved. So, before leaving, she approached her son, kissed him, and told him she loved him. She had a demanding work day due to the Super Bowl. After midnight, around 12:30 a.m. on February 5th, 2007, exhausted from the intense hours, Charity was cleaning tables at the restaurant, eager to finish her shift and return home to rest and see her children. That's when several police officers arrived at the establishment. As she went to find the manager, she heard her name mentioned in the office and felt terror. Confused and disoriented, she couldn't understand what was happening when an officer told her that her 4-year-old daughter was injured. Her immediate reaction was to ask what had happened and where her daughter was. Then, the officer informed her that her daughter had passed away. Unable to bear the shock, Charity fainted. There is nothing more terrifying for a mother than the death of a child. But the truth she heard from the police was much crueler and more painful than she could have imagined. While being taken by the police to the station, Charity asked about her son Paris, and an officer responded that they had him. This brief and stark answer made her realize her worst nightmare had come true. When she heard her daughter had died, she felt shattered. But learning that Paris was the perpetrator was like having those shattered pieces broken again. According to the police investigation, that night the babysitter had taken the kids out for Chinese food. They returned home and watched a children's movie. The little girl then went to her room to sleep, while Paris retreated to his because he had to finish his homework. It's unknown at what moment Paris decided to end his sister's life, but as a bright and manipulative teenager around 10 at night, he managed to convince the babysitter she could go home, assuring her that his mother was on her way. With her absence, it would be easier for him to execute his plan. What happened once they were alone was a true scene of terror. Paris went to Ella's room, beat her, sexually abused the little girl, barely 4 years old, and suffocated her. Then, with a knife he had taken from the kitchen, he gave her 17 fatal stabs. Immediately after the attack, Paris picked up the phone and called a friend, engaging in a conversation about various topics. Roughly 2 minutes after ending this call, which lasted 6 minutes at 11:42 p.m., the teenager dialed 911. During the call with the emergency operator, Paris seemed desperate and distressed about the atrocious act he had just committed. When asked if the girl was bleeding, he admitted she was because he had inflicted several wounds on her. The operator instructed Paris to perform CPR while waiting for emergency services and provided the necessary directions. On the recording, Paris can be heard counting as if following the instructions, but investigators later concluded that he never attempted to revive her. This was deduced from the position of the little girl's body and the bloodstain patterns found at the scene. In an attempt to justify his actions, Paris told the operator that he had hallucinated and thought his little sister was a demon. Soon, the street outside was filled with police and paramedics. Paris was taken into custody and brought to the police station while the investigation began at their home. During interrogation, he again mentioned his demonic hallucinations, claiming he was sleeping with his sister and woke up to her face looking different, like a demon engulfed in flames. He said he thought she was possessed and attacked her in a panic attack. As Paris continued his account, however, he fell into contradictions. He mentioned feeling resentment towards his sister since her birth because he was no longer the center of attention. Initially, investigators thought jealousy might have motivated the attack. But then he revealed his original plan also included killing his mother when she returned home. After a long, confusing, and painful night, Charity arrived at the police station to see her son. The inconsolable mother was shattered but became emotional upon seeing Paris. She got up, hugged, and caressed him amid tears, showing him she was there for him. Paris's reaction, in contrast, was cold and emotionless. He simply sat and coldly asked her what she planned to do. When Charity broke down in tears asking what he meant, Paris reminded her that she had always said she could take someone's life if they harmed her children. His question was not out of fear, but rather a challenge. At that moment, Charity realized there was something very dark in her son. Following his arrest, Paris was charged with the murder but not tried as an adult, as the minimum age for adult prosecution in Texas is 14 years. Instead, he was charged in juvenile court and pleaded guilty to capital murder. Charity was left feeling confused and unsure of what to do next. Although Paris's defense team suggested he not plead guilty for Charity, this was unthinkable. She couldn't hate her son and wanted him to be held accountable for his actions. Yet she also desperately sought to understand what had driven him to such extremes. While the prosecution aimed for a life sentence, his lawyer was preparing to secure the lightest sentence possible. As part of their efforts, the defense advised against Charity receiving mental health counseling, fearing that the prosecution might use the reports against Paris. Despite the traumatic ordeal she faced as the mother of both the victim and the perpetrator, she finally accessed counseling 2 years after the crime. She was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive disorders. Charity lost 15 kilograms in 13 days, started self-harming, and harbored a strong desire to die. Nevertheless, she knew she had to be strong for Paris, whom she never stopped loving despite the circumstances. In the months following, Paris was in complete isolation. He didn't speak and communicated only through letters and drawings. 2 months before his sentencing, Paris began to reject simple instructions and became more violent. On one occasion, he repeatedly hit a fellow inmate in the face and received a warning for making derogatory comments about other inmates. He later flooded his cell and confronted guards who came to see what was happening. During evaluations, he referred to the crime against his sister with a smile on his face. Prison staff reported that Paris repeatedly tried to manipulate them into giving him his mother's address. At one point, Texas Department of Justice officials said he had hacked the jail's computer system, though the intent was unclear. During this time, 2 psychologists evaluated Paris and reviewed the case. Each report described the boy as showing marked antisocial behavior, reduced empathy, and remorse. The specialist wrote that he had a moderate risk of developing traits characteristic of psychopathy and pathological narcissism. They asserted that the teenager displayed all the characteristics of a psychopath. They went further, suggesting to Charity that she change her identity and move somewhere Paris could never find her. Paris was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which is the maximum sentence for capital murder in a Texas juvenile court. Had he been an adult, he would have faced the death penalty. Paris will be eligible for parole for the time in February 2027. If he is never granted parole, he will be released in February 2047, by which time he will be over 50 years old. 2 years after his sentencing, Paris made chilling and macabre confessions about his motivations. He revealed that his original plan was to take the life of his mother, Charity, but after much thought, he realized he wanted to make her suffer in a way that killing her would not achieve. By taking away her young daughter, Ella, he knew Charity would suffer for the rest of her life. In 2013, 6 years after losing Ella, Charity became pregnant and decided to raise her new baby, Phoenix, on her own. Despite still being devastated by the loss of her beloved Ella, Phoenix brought life, joy, and a renewed will to move forward back into her life. However, Phoenix's arrival was not without challenges. He was born with a defective heart valve and had to undergo open heart surgery. Fortunately, he recovered successfully. When Paris learned of his mother's pregnancy, he sent her a letter expressing his happiness, even though he knew he would never be able to meet his half-brother in person due to legal restrictions preventing convicted felons from contacting minors under 17 years of age. This restriction was a relief for Charity, who never brought Phoenix to the prison. Although Paris and Phoenix never met in person, they talked over the phone when Charity called her eldest son. Despite trying to handle these interactions naturally, Charity always harbored the fear of doing something that might put Phoenix in danger from his brother. In 2013, at the age of 19, Paris was transferred to an adult prison. 6 years later, in 2019, he gained significant attention after an interview with journalist Piers Morgan. In the interview, a calm 26-year-old Paris claimed he never felt he achieved any goal by killing his sister. He expressed being completely different from the person he was at the time of the murder and acknowledged the deep hatred he once felt for his mother, though he admitted to harboring thoughts of committing a crime since he was very young. Paris' story inspired documentaries revealing his manipulative and narcissistic personality. However, he consistently insisted that he was not mentally ill. For a long time, Charity visited and communicated with Paris through letters and phone calls. She shared her story with various media outlets, explaining that after her daughter's death, nothing made sense anymore, marking the end of the life she knew. Reflecting on the past, she regretted relapsing into drug use, believing it injured Paris, but she did not regret how she raised him. In 2021, Charity declared that she had ceased all communication with Paris. This decision came after learning he had become involved with a woman on bail living 2 hours from her home. Charity acknowledged that while she still loved Paris as her son, she did not like the man he had become. Following the tragedy, Charity established a foundation named Ella in honor of her daughter, which also stands for empathy, love, lessons, and action in English. Through this initiative, she advises families of both victims of violent crimes and offenders. Having experienced both sides of such tragedies, as a child when her mother was accused of her father's murder, and later as a mother when Paris committed his crime, Charity understands the profound impact violent crimes have on families. She feels that the best way to honor her daughter, Ella, is by helping others navigate adversity, regardless of which side of the story they are on. This foundation serves as a testament to her commitment to supporting those affected by violent crimes and creating a platform for healing and understanding. Charity's work aims to provide guidance and support to those facing similar challenges, helping them to find a path forward amidst the turmoil and pain caused by such life-altering events. After 13 years working, Charity decided to shut down the Ella Foundation to focus on her son, Phoenix. In November of 1980, an archaeologist found a shallow grave in a secluded desert region that contained the remains of 2 unidentified homicide victims, a male and a female. Neither of the victims was wearing any clothing, nor was there any type of distinguishing identification found inside the gravesite. Examiners from the Specialized Investigations Division Homicide Detail began an investigation into the homicide of the 2 victims. A post-mortem examination was performed, which showed that the 2 victims died due to gunshot wounds, confirming that it was indeed a case of homicide. Agents subsequently began their investigation with the most common approach of that time to identify the 2 victims. For a long time, all efforts to identify the victims were met with failure. Every tool was employed by the police to find the culprit and identify the victims, but nothing worked. During the investigation, the police compiled data that identified a person of interest by the name of Howard Neal, originally from Mississippi. They learned that Neal had been living in the town of Ludlow, California, around the same time the victims were killed and buried in the shallow grave. Neal was living with his partner and their young daughter at the time, but it was found that they moved out of town soon after the victims were killed. After leaving Ludlow, Neal and his family traveled to Mississippi. He remained in Mississippi for a brief time, And if you thought that he ran away out of guilt and fear, you're sorely mistaken. While he was in Mississippi, he killed his brother and then assaulted and killed his 13-year-old niece and her 12-year-old close friend. Not long after those homicides, Neil and his family left Mississippi and began traveling across the United States. The crime scenes in Mississippi were discovered in February 1981. By March, Neil ended up in Stockton, California. On March 6, 1981, Neil was arrested for petty theft by the Stockton Police Department. While in custody in Stockton, the police discovered that there was a warrant from Mississippi for the triple homicides he had committed. Neil was sent back to Mississippi, and in February 1982, Neil stood trial for the Mississippi murders. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. Roughly 8 years after he was sentenced, Neil's lawyer filed an appeal, arguing that Neil's psychological state showed he was borderline mentally challenged. Testing was done, and the results showed that Neil's IQ was low enough for the judges to grant the appeal. The Mississippi Court of Appeals reduced his death sentence to 3 life terms, which he is still serving. The police investigating the Ludlow murders tried to talk to Neil, but each attempt was denied by his lawyer representing him in the Mississippi murders. His lawyers, however, did tell the agents in California that they didn't need to look any further for a suspect in the Ludlow murders. In the decades following the Ludlow murders, DNA technology advanced significantly. The remains of the Ludlow victims were sent to a lab to recover DNA samples. After several attempts by different labs, they finally managed to create a profile. Those samples were placed into the National DNA Database with the hope that a match would be made and perhaps help identify the Ludlow victims. Unfortunately, there was no match, and the victims remained unidentified for over 40 years. The case remained cold for decades until August 2017, when Neil finally spoke to the San Bernardino County detectives. In August 2017, Senior District Attorney Investigator Steve Shumway and San Bernardino County Sheriff's Investigator Garrett Teslar took over the investigation of the Ludlow homicides. Shumway and Teslar went to Mississippi to speak with Howard Neil. The main point of the meeting was to determine whether Neil could help investigators by providing them with information about the victims' identities. He didn't reveal much, but it was enough for the detectives to solve the case. He did, however, admit that the female victim might have been from Arkansas and had abandoned her young daughter before she began hitchhiking across the region. He also said that the female had what appeared to be a twisted arm. He was unable to recall anything about the male victim other than that he seemed to be something of a hippie. He told investigators that he picked up the couple while they were hitchhiking on the highway. He then took the two to his home, where he got into an argument with the male. The argument was about Neil making inappropriate advances toward the female. Neil told the officers that the argument became so heated that he believed the male would likely kill him if he didn't act first. Neil then shot and killed the male. Immediately after killing the male, Neil continued his advances toward the female. The officers concluded that Neil physically assaulted her and then, at some point, killed her. Neil wasted no time in transporting the victims to a remote desert area south of Highway 66, digging a shallow grave and dumping the bodies. The female's daughter provided the clue that the detectives were searching for. Christine Marie Sally was looking for her biological mother and hired a private investigator in 2018. She provided them with her DNA samples, and a positive match was found between her and the female victim. She later told investigators that her mother's name was Pamela Diane Duffy, who had disappeared with a man called Digger Lane. She had no other information about him apart from the fact that he had been incarcerated in Virginia for a short time. After reaching out to investigators in Virginia, they discovered that the male victim was a man named William Everett Lane. His biological mother was located, and she provided her DNA samples to confirm the match and the male victim's identity. It was January 27, 1996, when 17-year-old Glattis Ariano went missing from her home in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, California. She was a young girl with big ambitions and was ready to conquer the world. Glattis' family reported her missing the same day she failed to return, and investigators began their search for her. There was hope that Glattis would be found, until the unimaginable happened. 3 days later, on January 30th, a body was discovered. It was Glattis, located 34 miles from downtown Los Angeles, tossed into a ravine in a remote area of Topanga. Her autopsy showed that she had been assaulted and later murdered. Investigations began and DNA was collected from her body, leading to a DNA profile. The investigators were confident that they would find a match quickly. But to their surprise and disappointment, there was no match. After several attempts to find the culprit, no other evidence remained, and the case went cold for over 25 years. Decades later, in November 2019, a man named Jose Luis Garcia was arrested for domestic assault. According to California law, Garcia was required to submit a DNA sample. Little did the officers know that this unrelated crime would help them solve a long cold case. Investigators obtained a warrant to compare his DNA to the 1996 crime scene evidence. Unfortunately, this took time and Garcia was released, moving back to Dallas before results came in. Forensic experts analyzed the sample and confirmed it matched the DNA obtained from Glattis Ariano's body in 1996. Texas law enforcement acted quickly, arresting him and questioning him about the 1996 incident. Yet he claimed no knowledge of it, despite the DNA match. At the time of Glattis' murder, Garcia was only 18, but the motive remains unknown. Garcia has not yet been convicted and is still awaiting trial. He is currently held on a $1 million bail. After 25 years, sheer luck revealed Glattis' killer, but justice may still take time. Wendy Jerome, a 19-year-old teenager, was sexually assaulted, beaten, and then brutally killed in 1984. It was the 2nd of November, 1984 in Rochester, New York, and everyone was busy with their Thanksgiving celebrations when this horrible incident took place. It was in the evening when Wendy left her house to deliver a birthday card to her best friend, who lived in the same neighborhood. She was expected home by 8 p.m. that night, but she never returned. When she did not return, her family became frantic and called the authorities for help in looking for their daughter. A few hours later, it was reported that Wendy's body was found near a dumpster behind a school. She had been sexually assaulted and later brutally murdered. The investigations began, and DNA samples were collected from Wendy's body in order to find the culprit. Unfortunately, forensic technology was not as advanced in the 1980s, and no matches were found for the next few decades. 36 years later, the investigations were reopened after Wendy's mother was adamant about getting justice for her daughter. The sample, taken back in 1984, had stayed preserved since then. It was once again entered into the DNA database and used to find relatives. Only this time, a match was found. It was a 54-year-old man named Timothy Williams, who lived in Melbourne, Florida. Timothy had lived in Rochester in 1984 and shared the same neighborhood as Wendy Jerome. However, the two did not know each other. Timothy was extradited back to Rochester from Florida immediately and was asked multiple questions regarding the murder. At first, he refused to recall any association with Wendy, but the amount of evidence against him was far too much to ignore. The DNA from the semen found on Wendy's body was an exact match to Timothy's DNA. There was no room for escape. He was charged with second-degree murder but was not charged with sexual assault, as those charges had expired over 10 years before Timothy was arrested. Almost 36 years later, Wendy Jerome got justice. While it was said that her father passed away before he could see the face of her murderer, her mother lived to see the day. She was reported saying, "I never thought I would see this day, and now it's here." Mrs. Jerome said, "I just wish my husband had been alive to see this. He passed away in 2011, and I know he's up there with her, smiling and saying it's over. It's finally over." Bobby Jamison and Sherry Lynn Jamison, despite some eccentricities, were a rather ordinary couple. They preferred to keep a distance from commitments and other socialization demands. The couple met in the summer of 2002 and quickly fell in love, marrying soon after. Sherry Lynn had a son, Colton, from a previous marriage who got along well with Bobby. In 2004, their family expanded with the birth of their daughter, Madison Jamison. The Jamisons lived in Eufaula, Oklahoma, where Colton had spent part of his childhood. However, in July 2009, Colton was sent to live with his father for unknown reasons. Life wasn't always easy for the Jamisons. Sherilyn had battled depression since her sister's death in a bizarre accident involving a bee sting on her tongue. She was also diagnosed with bipolar disorder and sometimes neglected her medication. Bobby faced his own challenges after a car accident, left him with chronic debilitating back pain, preventing him from working. The constant pain and financial worries contributed to his depression as well. Their mental health issues began affecting their marriage, leading to arguments and discussions about possible divorce. The Jamisons were a reclusive family, often keeping their personal matters hidden from even those closest to them. Bobby and Sherilyn were deeply religious and engaged in spiritual practices, but they also harbored intense paranoia about spirits invading their home. They sought guidance from a preacher, sharing their fears with him. Sherilyn was particularly concerned about spirits communicating with their daughter, Madison, who talked to an imaginary friend named Emily. This behavior was likely Madison's way of coping with the family's chaotic environment. Bobby, worried about spirits on their roof, inquired about special bullets to eliminate them. He also possessed a satanic Bible, intending to use it for exorcising spirits from their home. The Jamisons owned a storage container on their Eufaula property, intending to use it as temporary housing while building their new home on a mountain. The container attracted attention from neighbors due to the unusual graffiti Sherilyn, who claimed to be a witch, sprayed on it. She believed her black cats were being poisoned and accused neighbors of the act, causing discomfort and leading them to avoid the Jamisons. Sherilyn's desire for solitude ultimately aligned. The neighbors' inclination to keep their distance. Feeling uncomfortable in their neighborhood and seeking a fresh start to possibly save their marriage, the Jamisons showed interest in a remote piece of land near Red Oak, about 30 miles from their home. On October 7, 2009, the family set out in their truck to see the land but got lost and stopped to ask for directions. Deciding to return home, they ventured back to the mountains the next day. The Jamisons, being a private family, often went weeks without contact with friends or relatives, so it wasn't unusual for them to be out of touch for over a week. On top of this, the family had informed Madison's school that they would be withdrawing her as they were moving away, hence why the school never asked after her. 8 days after anyone had last seen or heard from the Jamisons on the 8th, hunters reported an abandoned truck on the top of Panola Mountain and reported it to police, who determined that it belonged to the Jamisons. The truck was locked and it appeared that all of the family's possessions, including their dog, Maisie, were inside. Maisie was miraculously still alive, but extremely malnourished, having not eaten for a number of days. Authorities freed Maisie from the truck, bringing her to live with Bobby's mother. When authorities began investigating the mysterious disappearance of the Jamison family, they learned that on October 8, 2009, 44-year-old Bobby, 40-year-old Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter Madison were last seen by a man living in the mountains of southeastern Oklahoma. This sole witness informed the authorities that he saw only the family and no one else in the area during that time. At the time, the county sheriff told the press that the witness was a landowner in the Red Oak area and that they had searched the area but found no clues. Officially, the Jamisons were near this area to view a 16-hectare plot they intended to buy. Strangely, they planned to live on this land in a storage container they already owned on their property in Eufaula. Police discovered several personal belongings in the truck, including cell phones, Sherilyn's purse, and Bobby's wallet in the family's truck, believing the family might be lost in the dense and treacherous woodlands of Panola Mountain. Authorities utilized the GPS data from Bobby and Sherilyn's cell phones to trace their movements. The GPS trail led them up a hill where they found small footprints, presumably belonging to Madison. At the hill summit, a photo of Madison was discovered on the cell phone belonging to Bobby. The picture sparked varied interpretations of her emotional state. Some observers suggested she looked on the verge of laughter, while others perceived her as close to tears. The theory emerged that someone other than her parents might have taken the photo, given her lack of smile and seemingly uncomfortable body language. However, the photo's significance as evidence is debatable, as discerning Madison's thoughts or feelings from the image is challenging. It's argued that a 6-year-old would likely not hide fear or threat, so if she felt intimidated by the photographer, her expression would probably clearly reflect fear, which is not evident in the photo. Authorities estimated that the family spent approximately 15 minutes at the mountain's peak before returning to their truck. This moment marks the beginning of the mystery, as their subsequent actions and whereabouts remain unknown. The following day, a large-scale search operation was launched involving over 100 law enforcement personnel, volunteers, search dogs, and helicopters. But the family was not found. Further investigation of the truck revealed several intriguing clues. Hidden under the front seat was a bag containing $32,000 in cash. Additionally, an 11-page letter written by Sherilyn, filled with hostility and hatred towards Bobby, was discovered. The letter conveyed Sherilyn's feelings of neglect and indifference from Bobby towards his family. She criticized him for being a recluse and for not valuing his family, highlighting the strained dynamics within the household. Parallel to the on-site investigation, police followed essential steps in any missing persons investigation. They spoke with the couple's family in close circles, where they learned that the Jamisons had some peculiar traits. Friends reported that the family had begun acting strangely, and both Bobby and Sherilyn had lost a significant amount of weight before disappearing. The sheriff at the time speculated that the family might have been involved in drugs. Although no evidence of this was found, there were also references to the couple's erratic behavior, seeing moving objects to the vehicle in a way that seemed robotic or trance-like. Unfortunately, questioning those close to the couple only confirmed their atypical nature, but shed no light on the family's whereabouts. As months and then years passed without further leads, the case remained unsolved. The next discovery related to the case occurred in 2013, again reported by hunters. This finding would at least partially resolve the mystery of the Jamison family's disappearance. The hunters found the remains of 3 bodies belonging to 2 adults and a child. The discovery of the remains occurred near where the Jamisons' vehicle was found in 2009, leading many to believe they belonged to the missing family. However, confirmation was needed. At the time, the sheriff was asked by journalists why the bodies were not found in 2009, despite the intensive search and the use of tracking dogs. She speculated that the bodies might have been covered by falling leaves, which could have caused rescuers to overlook them. Bobby's paternal uncle was the first family member to speak with the media. He explained that while it wasn't definitive that the remains were his nephew and his family, all evidence pointed to them. He had been contacted by the FBI about the discovery and said he had no hope that the family was still alive 4 years after their disappearance. For him, finding the bodies provided closure, although it was sad because the reasons for their fate were unknown. He found it particularly painful that an innocent child had met such an undeserved end. Meanwhile, authorities warned that the process of identifying the bodies would take time. The county sheriff's office, the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the state medical examiner's office searched the area but found no evidence to help identify the remains, as they reported in a joint statement. A spokesperson for the medical examiner's office said they received the skeletal remains of 2 adults and a child, and announced they would use pathological, anthropological, and forensic methods to determine if the remains belonged to the Jamison family. She clarified that identification could take days or even years, depending on the condition and preservation of the remains. Many months later, on July 3, 2014, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to the Jamison family. The forensic analysis of the bodies revealed no soft tissues, only partial skeletal remains due to significant scavenger and rodent activity at the site. Despite this, the bodies appeared to have been placed side by side and face down. Skulls were present, and although a small hole was found in Bobby's skull, possibly caused by a bullet, the state of decomposition meant the medical examiner could not determine a definitive cause of death. Since the Jamisons' disappearance, 5 theories have been publicized to explain their deaths, but none have been confirmed. The first theory suggests an accident, pointing to weather reports in the area at the time showing temperatures of around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. In the days following their disappearance, the area experienced heavy rains, but not enough to cause death. The bodies were found only 4 kilometers from their truck. raising the possibility that the family got lost in the woods and died of hypothermia and exposure. However, this doesn't explain why their truck was left as if they intended to return soon. The second theory proposes a scenario of murder followed by a suicide decision. It was known that both Bobby and Sherilyn suffered extreme stress throughout their lives. 11-page long letter was found in their truck, in which Sherilyn expressed her resentment towards Bobby, accusing him of being a hermit. Another letter found in their family home was said to mention death. Although Sherilyn's mother stated that writing such letters was common for her due to her bipolar condition, Sherilyn's gun was also missing from the car. This raised the question of whether Sherilyn could have walked 4 kilometers with her family to kill them and then take her own life. Police also investigated the theory that the Jamison family's deaths were a murder-suicide, but not by Sherilyn, instead by Bobby. According to this hypothesis, Bobby might have read his wife's resentful letter and decided to end everyone's lives. However, this theory weakens with the evidence, as no weapon was found near the bodies. This does not rule out the possibility of death by poison or other means. It's also unclear why they would have traveled so far from the truck to end their lives, especially since Bobby had mobility issues in his own home due to his injuries. The scenario of him walking 4 kilometers through mountainous terrain seemed improbable. Moreover, this does not explain why they were found lying face down, side by side. The third theory involves Bobby's father, 67-year-old Bob Dean Jamison, as responsible for the murders. It was revealed that in early 2009, about 6 months before the family disappeared, that Bobby had filed for a protective order against his father. He described his father as a dangerous man who thought he was above the law and had connections with prostitutes, gang members, and methamphetamine trafficking. Bobby also claimed that his father had threatened to kill him and his family on 2 separate occasions. Once in November 2008 and again in April 2009, Bobby feared for their lives as his father had once hit him with a vehicle. Bobby had been involved in a dispute with his father, which resulted in Bob removing everyone except Madison from his will. The dispute stemmed from disagreements over a supposed deal between them. Bobby claimed he worked at his father's service station for free under the understanding that he would inherit half of the business. But his father later said that agreement never existed. However, Bob died just 2 months after the Jamisons' disappearance and had been ill for some time. His brother Jack stated that Bob was either in a hospital or a nursing home at the time of the incident and added that although Bob was a disturbed person, he was not capable of being involved in the murders. The fourth theory is that the Jamisons were killed by a cult. Sherilyn's mother believed that the Jamisons were murdered by a religious cult in southeastern Oklahoma. According to her, the cult had violent members and had put Sherilyn on a blacklist. However, she never named a specific cult, and no evidence has been found to support this theory. It has also been suggested that the Jamisons practiced witchcraft. Reports indicated that a witch's Bible was found in the family's home. However, Sherilyn's best friend, Nikki, stated that the supposed satanic book was purchased solely for the purpose of a prank. Yet Bobby's spiritual advisor mentioned that Bobby had confessed to reading the satanic Bible. This raises several questions about the theory of a cult-related murder. Why were the bodies found deep in the forest, and how did they get there? Were they forced to walk at gunpoint, or were they taken there after being killed? Transporting bodies 4 kilometers through dense forest would be challenging, suggesting the involvement of more than one perpetrator. The fifth theory relates to drug issues. Rumors suggested that Bobby's parents were involved in illicit substance trafficking, and some suspected that the family was involved in a drug deal gone wrong. The Jamisons' aforementioned strange behavior could be explained by drug influence. However, former sheriffs stated that there was no evidence to support the theory of drug use or trafficking by the couple. Many have pointed out that Bobby and Sherilyn were good parents and would not have taken medicine with them if they were involved in a drug-related event. The fact that the bodies were found aligned and face down could suggest an execution-style murder. If so, was it premeditated? Who knew they would be in that remote mountain area at that time? And what was the motive? Alternatively, they might have stumbled upon something they shouldn't have seen and were silenced. But again, why were they taken so deep into the forest? Over time, when revisiting the case to find closure and a responsible party, a particular detail emerged. Fill bottle found in the Jamisons' vehicle. It was determined to belong to a former guest at the family's house who had been expelled for being the white supremacist. Sherry Lynn, who had Native American ancestry, had reportedly expelled him at gunpoint only a month before the disappearance. The dispute arose because the individual, whose identity remains confidential, expressed beliefs that all non-white people needed to die. While he seemed to have a motive for revenge, he provided a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect by the FBI. Rumors then circulated that the Jamisons were on the blacklist of a white supremacist group known as the United White Knights. The mountains where they disappeared were known as a hotbed for far-right extremists. And near where the Jamisons' truck was downed, a vandalized car was covered with racist slogans. Sherilyn had supposedly been part of the group's missions, but had rewritten the messages with religious words of peace and love. Although white supremacists are active in the area, no concrete evidence has been produced to support their involvement in the case. Ultimately, all the theories remain speculative. To this date, what happened to the Jamisons on October 8, 2009, remains unknown. And unless someone who knows the truth comes forward, it will continue to be an unresolved mystery with limitless theories but very few answers. The story begins when a sweet girl named Susan Cox Powell was born on October 16, 1981. She was born in Oregon and was known to be a very social, outgoing, and warm person. She used to be the center of attention wherever she went. She had a great bond with everyone and was very selfless. She used to never think twice before helping someone, as she was a very friendly and kindred spirit. Susan was married to her husband Josh Powell, who was born on January 26, 1976 in Oregon. Josh was not a very normal person, as he had a very tumultuous yet disturbing childhood. His father Stephen was very abusive and *****ing towards Josh when he was growing up. Josh had also been previously divorced before meeting Susan, and his court documents stated that he was emotionally suffering due to the abuse his father Stephen had made him go through. At one time, Josh tried to commit suicide but did not succeed. This was not the end of Josh's story. He even pulled out a ***** to kill his mom once because she asked him to do the dishes. Josh's mental condition was evidently not normal because of his father, who used to show him inappropriate stuff such as *****y at a very young age, which molded his personality into something unimaginable. Josh used to work as a web designer as well as in real estate. Susan and Josh were both devout Mormons and met each other at a church. Susan was only 19 years old when she met Josh. They both fell in love and soon got married. This shocked all of their family members, as it was a very abrupt and sudden decision, but Susan was sure that she and Josh were meant to be together forever. In April 2001, both Susan and Josh got married and lived a perfect happily married life for a few years. After a few years of living in Oregon, both Josh and Susan decided to move to Utah, specifically West Valley City. Later that year, January 19, 2005, they welcomed their first son Charlie into this world. 2 years later, they had their second son on January 2, 2007, named Braden. Charlie loved science, insects, and writing. He wanted to write a book one day, while Braden was an enthusiast when it came to trains, cars, and transformers. From the outside, they look like the perfect close-knit family, but sometimes things are not as they usually appear to be. Susan's childhood best friend Darlene was one of the first people Susan told that their marriage was not as perfect as it seems to be. She told her that Josh was very abusive towards her and was quite dominant when it came to their marriage. She said that Josh basically owned her, and every time she spoke about leaving, he would threaten her and says that the boys are his, and if she left, she would not be able to see their faces ever again. Darlene was confused if Susan knew all the stuff about Josh's childhood. Either she hid it pretty well or did not know about it all. She would also tell Darlene that there was no affection or understanding between husband and wife, and it was some understanding the abuse and Josh did to her. In addition to their deteriorating relationship, they were also struggling financially, which added more to their miseries. In April 2007, Josh went bankrupt after buying a lot of stuff on Susan's credit, which Susan made a video of. She filmed all of her belongings and said that she is making this video in case something happens to her or her family. She also mentioned a few times that Josh broke some of her necklaces because he was angry at her and threw them onto her. This video was quite odd for the spectators because they did not know what the actual purpose behind it was. Fast forward to December 6, 2009. It was a sunny morning when Susan and her two boys, who were 4 and 2 years old respectively, went to church. Later, a neighbor came to meet her at the house, and at 5 p.m., she left her house. The next day, December 7, 2007, Susan was supposed to drop her boys to the daycare, but surprisingly, she never showed up. The daycare called Josh's sister Jennifer, who claimed that Susan never came to meet her. Later, she went to their house and knocked at the door repeatedly, but nobody showed up. She got worried and suspected that something was wrong. She immediately called 911. When the police arrived, they decided to break into the house. After entering the house, all the police could find was Susan's purse and phone, but there was no sign of anyone there. This raised a lot of questions as to why Susan would leave without her purse and phone. Another thing that was odd was that 2 box fans were pointing towards the carpet as someone was trying to dry that. Josh claimed that he and his sons were out camping and Susan was not with them when they left. He just returned from the camping trip and said that he did not leave until midnight the previous day, so he did not have any idea where Susan went. He said that he went to the Simpson Springs in West Utah. The police went there but found no evidence of any crime or something that would lead on to suspect Josh. This case soon became national news, and Josh at this point was only a person of interest and not a suspect, as no evidence was found against him nor any clue about where Susan could be. A month after Susan had gone missing, Josh decided to pack up all his belongings and move to Washington with his father Stephen. This was a really strange thing to do, as it did not look like he cared about his missing wife, which put him under a radar, but he still maintained his innocence throughout. Few months have passed, and it is now the summer of 2010, with still no clue of Susan. Both the brothers Charlie and Braden were at a summer camp, where Braden drew a very disturbing picture. He drew a picture of a minivan, himself and his brother. He also drew a picture of his father, but not his mother. Upon asking Braden and Charlie, both said that on the fateful night, both their mother and father were in the minivan. They both left the van, but only their father came back. At one point, Charlie also said that his mother was dead. All these speculations from the young boys still did not force the police to arrest Josh, as this had become national news now. People speculated that Josh was now definitely involved in the disappearance of his wife. When Josh felt that the heat was getting stronger on him each day, he brought in his father Stephen to claim his innocence. He made it seem like Susan was mentally unstable, and Josh also claimed that Susan might be cheating on him with a 30-year-old journalist named Stephen Coker. He also disappeared a few days after Susan went missing. The problem with this claim was there was clearly no connection between him and Susan being related in any manner. Furthermore, Stephen disappeared from Las Vegas, which is about 400 miles from where Susan lived. Amidst all this, Josh's dad Stephen started to make a B********* G claims about Susan that she would S***** towards him. He said in an interview that Susan would bend over his lap to let him smell her hair or tell him to feel his thighs. All these new claims were coming from the father and son duo, which clearly looked like an attempt to direct attention from Susan's disappearance. Susan's friends and family said that all these claims were bizarre, as in reality, Susan was scared of her own father-in-law. Her family and friends claimed that Stephen would sometimes put his hand in the back of Susan's shirt, which freaked her out so much that, in order to get rid of him, she moved to Utah. The investigator suspected Stephen and decided to search his house. On searching his house, they found a bunch of inappropriate stuff, which included 3 computers and 2 boxes which were filled with 4,500 photos of Susan that were taken without her knowing. The photos also consisted of close-ups of her body parts, which confirmed that Stephen was actually ing attracted to Susan. On September 22nd of the same year, Stephen was arrested for child pornography and for watching someone without their knowledge. After all of this, Josh's kids were taken away from him and were put into foster care. Meanwhile, Susan's parents immediately filed for their custody, as they believed that Josh would harm the boys, as they might know something about their mother suddenly disappearing. In September 2011, Susan's parents were finally granted custody of the two boys. The judge also advised Josh to move out of his dad's house if he wanted to see his kids. Josh ended up moving to Graham, Washington, and was only allowed to see his kids in a secured facility. After a few visits, Josh was allowed to do in-home visits, which was the biggest mistake anyone could make in this case. Elizabeth Hall was the caretaker that supervised the in-home visits between Josh and the two boys. She said that she and the boys became really close during their visits. On February 1st, 2012, Josh had a court date scheduled in order to get the custody of his boys. But on that proceeding, the judge presented new evidence which was really disturbing photo. The police discovered really disturbing and cartoons from Josh. As they were only cartoons, the police could not arrest him, but they ruled out Josh's permission to see his boys. After hearing this news, Josh was overwhelmed, and as far as we believe, he started thinking of an evil plan at that point. After the proceedings, Josh went and withdrew $7,000 from his bank account, and then went and bought a lot of gas from the gas station in Philip Gallon. After that, he went to a thrift store and donated all of his son's toys. On February 5th, 2012, it was the morning when the boys were going to see their dad. The caretakers said that it was all fine, and the boys seemed happy to be with their dad. Elizabeth Hall picked up the boys from their grandparents and drove to Josh's house. During this time, Josh's family members received a very disturbing email from Josh which said, "I am sorry. Goodbye." They also received a voicemail stating that Josh cannot live without his kids, and I'm not able to go on anymore. I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt. Goodbye. Josh's sister got insanely worried and immediately called 911. She tried to call her brother, but he did not respond. Meanwhile, when Elizabeth Hall pulled up to his house, the boys jumped out of the car and ran towards the front door. Before Elizabeth could get in, Josh gave her a very weird look and slammed the door on her face before she could get in. She started screaming and banging on the door. While she was doing so, she heard Josh's voice telling Charlie that he had a surprise planned for him. Soon, the boys started crying, and she saw that Josh was attacking his sons with a hatchet. Elizabeth also smelled gasoline. She called 911 and told them about the entire situation. Even after several minutes of trying to convince the police that the situation was serious, nobody came to help. The moment she turned around, the house was blown up in a huge fire and nobody survived. Josh not only killed himself, but also his two kids. After this incident, everybody was sure that Josh had done something to Susan. When Josh's father Stephen was asked about this, he did not seem to care. He was released from prison on July 11th, 2017, and later passed away the following year in 2018. The official death cost of Josh and the two boys was carbon monoxide poisoning. And in August 2012, more information about Josh was revealed. Apparently, Josh had withdrawn his kids from daycare and canceled Susan's routine appointment with the chiropractor. He canceled her retirement account and also talked to a coworker about how to hide a body. Before Josh died, he named his friend Michael the sole beneficiary of his life insurance account. Police questioned his friend many times because they discovered that 2 years after Susan went missing, he got rid of his car in an abandoned junkyard in Oregon. Utah authorities stated that they believe Josh and Michael were both involved in the disappearance of Susan. However, on February 11th, 2013, Michael took his own life. Soon after that, the investigation was closed, but shortly after, the police found an old handwritten note from Susan, which said, "If I died, it might not be an accident," which further clarified that Josh had killed his wife. But nobody was left to give the officials any more answers. This was altogether a very mind-boggling case, which could have been prevented through careful observation and responsible steps to prevent the death of those two innocent children. Born in London, England on the 8th of February 1985, Joseph McCann's crime spree started from a very young age. When he was a small boy, his family moved onto a council estate in Manchester, and it was around this time that his interest in criminal activity started. Aged just 11, he had his first run-in with the law, and by the age of 13, he had already been convicted for theft. He and his two brothers created such fear amongst the community, the following multiple complaints to the council. The family were eventually evicted in 1998. As he got older, more arrests followed. including carrying a knife, criminal damage, and the handling of stolen goods. He would set fire to cars and threaten children and the elderly. Despite moving, the brothers frequently returned to their old council estates and continued what was described by the newspapers and neighbors as a campaign of terror. It wasn't long before the brothers were all issued with antisocial behavior orders, commonly known in the UK as ASBOs. They were among the first people in the UK to ever receive this. The order banned them from entering the Beswick area and exhibiting physically or verbally abusive or antisocial behaviors in the city of Manchester. This didn't appear to have much of an impact on the boys, as they were photographed laughing and swearing at the crowd while coming out of court. In the Beswick area, crime fell by a third, and one supermarket claimed that their revenue had risen by £14,000 after the ASBO against the boys was given. Their lawyer claimed it was against their human rights, and they appealed the ASBOs 3 times. This eventually resulted in them taking it to the Court of Appeal in 2001. But these appeals were flatly denied by the court. In 1999, the McCann family moved again, this time out of the Manchester area. They moved to the south of England, where the brothers continued their criminal activities. Around 2007, Joseph was living in Bedford. He'd recently become a father, but was not present for the birth nor in the baby's life due to spending time in prison. He was released later that year, but on the 27th of December he was arrested and jailed again for burglarizing an 85-year-old man's house and threatening to stab him. Fortunately, the elderly man had CCTV outside, and he was swiftly caught and sent back to prison in September of 2008. He was sentenced to imprisonment for public protection, or an IPP, in order to serve a minimum of 2 years and 6 months inside. His IPP was a form of an indeterminate sentence, meaning that when his sentence was done, the parole board for England and Wales would have to determine whether or not he posed a risk and whether or not it was safe to allow him back out. He would be on a 10-year-long license, meaning that if any criminal activity happened in those 10 years, he would be recalled to prison immediately. While in prison, various professionals and offending managers expressed their deep concern that he still presented a huge risk to society. One statement said that he posed serious harm to the public and known adults, as well as a medium risk to children, prison staff, and prisoners. They believed that he could also be a massive threat to teenage girls and showed signs of wanting to sexually exploit them. Due to the analysis of the professionals, his many appeals for release were denied, and he spent over 8 years in prison. While Joseph was doing time, his brother Sean was also serving a 2-year sentence at HMP Peterborough for assault. Sean took his own life while in prison. Joseph completed several rehabilitation courses and was eventually released on license in March of 2017. After he was released, he went back to Buckinghamshire to live with family and then quickly moved out and off the radar. This meant his offender manager was not able to contact him or keep track of where he was. Despite his long stint in prison, he wasn't deterred, and the crimes just didn't stop. A few months later, he was arrested again and spent another 2 years in prison. When sentencing him, the judge told him that it would run concurrently with his IPP sentence. However, his offender manager team did not recall him on that sentence. If they had done, he would have had to appear before a parole board again before being considered for release. Unfortunately, this meant he was able to be released just halfway through his sentence. Staff at the prison contacted the probation services about their concerns surrounding the fact his sentence was not running alongside his IPP. They felt he was still evidently a very imminent threat to the public. Despite this, in 2019, he was released without appearing in front of a parole board. He continued to move around the country, evading his offender manager team's attempts to contact him. On the 21st of April, 2019, his crime spree would take a much more frightening and sinister turn. At 3:30 a.m., he abducted a 21-year-old woman at knife point as she was walking back from a nightclub. He drove her back to an unknown house and raped her. Although he had told her his name was Joel McCann, he was identified the very next morning by Hertfordshire police. However, they couldn't locate him. Just 4 days later, he abducted another woman in northeast London and subjected her to a horrific sexual assault over the space of 14 hours. He was spotted casually making a stop to a drive-through with the frightened woman in the back seat. She was also still in his car when he held another woman at knife point and forced her into the vehicle. While drinking bottles of vodka, he drove to Watford with the women and attempted to book into a hotel. After he was unsuccessful, one of the women smashed the vodka bottle over his head, allowing them both to escape. Investigators drew up a list of suspects based on previous offending, but as McCann had never committed a sex offense before, he wasn't on the list. These cases weren't linked with the April 21st attack until over a week later. Following this, a nationwide manhunt was on to find Joseph McCann, and a reward of £20,000 was put up for anyone who could help. On the May 5th, McCann was back in Manchester. He met a woman in a bar and convinced her to let him go back to her house. Once at her house, he tied her up and raped both her 17-year-old daughter and her 11-year-old son. The daughter managed to escape out the window and ran for help, but Joseph was gone by the time the police and neighbors arrived at 8 a.m. Around 1 p.m. that day, a suspect had been arrested and taken into custody, but it wasn't Joseph McCann. While officers were interviewing the wrong man, McCann had moved on and driven to Barry. At 1:30 p.m., he abducted a 71-year-old woman outside of a Morrison supermarket. He attacked her and raped her. He stole her car, and while the woman was still in it with him, he attacked and kidnapped a 13-year-old girl. She too was sexually assaulted. The pair managed to escape at a service station later that afternoon, but Joseph carried on in the victim's car. That same evening at around 6:30 p.m. he was driving in Cheshire when he forced two 14-year-old girls into the car and threatened to kill them. He was seen driving to a petrol station and buying a packet of condoms. The two girls, although not shown, were in the back. He was on a dangerous and disturbing rampage. Fueled further by cocaine and vodka, he had no intent of stopping, and there was no limit to how far he would take his appalling crimes. Joseph McCann was now the most wanted man in the country. It was in this moment, however, that the police finally caught up with him. They spotted him in his car with the two girls in the back and began chasing him. McCann crashed the car into a Mercedes and started fleeing on foot. Fortunately, the two girls weren't injured, just extremely shaken. He somehow managed to escape on foot before stealing a bike and riding away. He then abandoned the bike and booked a taxi at around 8:15 p.m. It was at this point that roadblocks had been set up in the area and the police were closing in on Joseph McCann. Cheshire Constabulary, however, did not issue a warning to say he was in the area until 8:45 p.m. A police officer stopped the taxi and unknowingly spoke to McCann, who was holding a pint glass, and said he was returning home after a visit to the pub. The officer had a description of McCann and knew he would have a large tattoo on his stomach if it was him. He asked McCann to lift up his shirt, to which McCann shouted obscenities at him and ran out of the taxi. After almost 9 hours of chasing Joseph McCann in cars, on foot and using helicopters, on the 6th of May at 2:36 a.m., he was found hiding up a tree down a rural country lane. After a long battle with negotiators, he was finally detained and arrested. He taunted the police by saying, "If you had caught me for the first two, the rest of this wouldn't have happened." He also claimed that the young girls in his car had just wanted a lift and he was simply helping them out. He entered a not guilty plea to all the charges related to the 11 women and children. On December 6th of that same year, he appeared via video link from Belmarsh Prison at the Old Bailey Courthouse in London. Mr. Justice Adis was presiding. McCann refused to come to court and complained that he was sleep-deprived and physically couldn't make it in. Not only did he show no respect for the justice system, he showed no remorse to any of his victims. He was tried and unanimously convicted of a shocking 37 offenses. The jury praised the victims for their bravery and courage in coming forward. Joseph McCann was given 33 life sentences in order to spend a minimum of 40 years in prison for his heinous and appalling crimes. The judge branded him a classic psychopath, and his violent and horrific rampage was described as unprecedented. Police believe that for those 15 days they were hunting for him, he was using a variety of disguises, cars, and false names. He was also being hidden and protected by various associates, and 6 people were arrested in connection with concealing him. The frightening and depraved acts that Joseph McCann had inflicted on so many people and communities enraged the public. People couldn't fathom how he had been released from prison with his IPP sentence being ignored. BBC News said that the National Probation Service had not followed the correct procedures, and following his 2017 arrest, he should have been made to answer to the parole board before being released. this would likely have been denied by the board, meaning he would have remained in prison. The Ministry of Justice conducted an investigation and review into what had gone wrong within the broader criminal justice system in dealing with Joseph McCann. Although not normally done, these findings were released to the public. They concluded that the National Probation Service did not manage McCann effectively or in line with the policies and procedures which set out the expectations for managing offenders who pose a high risk of harm. Very concerning case. Was a dreadful, dreadful set of offenses. And in this case, I think there was clearly an individual error. McCann should have been referred to the pro board after he'd committed further offenses. They also found that the management of him as an individual was not consistent enough, with a high turnover of staff and subsequent files and paperwork that needed to be handed over being rushed. Other newspapers suggested that budget cuts and staff shortages within the NPS had a part to play in things too. After an internal investigation, one member of staff was demoted. There has never been a consequence as devastating as this. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.